So I'm curious, Joe, I haven't checked in with you in a while regarding Obsidian. Are you still using it?
I am. It's great fun.
Nice. How many notes you got in there now?
Not anywhere near as many as you do. Guaranteed on that front.
True.
100%. No, it's, I don't know, maybe, what is it? 350 or so.
Okay.
But
cool. Well, I was just curious if it was sticking for you because I have been telling everybody about Obsidian. I tried to convince Chuck Joyner to use it the other day on Mac Voices.
Yep.
I just, as we record this, presented a 3-hour workshop on Obsidian.
How did that go? I saw all the stuff around it, but I didn't get a chance to join it.
It was great fun. It actually went really well. It was a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be, which is good, but also made me extremely nervous. You know how I put my slides together. I do all the video ahead of time and then chop it up into those little...
You're crazy. That's what you
auto
are.
playing. Yeah. So I had the 155 of those video slides that I walked through.
Good work.
Yeah, it was a lot of work, but it went really well. So at least from my perspective, got some good feedback from folks. Quick tip for people who are following what I am doing. I'm working on an Obsidian course for the Suite Setup. This workshop was a paid workshop. It was $79. The course is going to be $149. But just between you and me, if you buy the workshop, because you can still buy the replay now, you will get the course when it comes out. So if you are already convinced that you want to get that course, you can save quite a bit of money if you buy the workshop now, plus you get access to the 3-hour Zero to Obsidian thing that I did.
Nice.
So it's at thesuitesetup.com/Obsidian, and it'll be available until the course comes out. End of July is kind of what we're shooting for. But I am in love with this application. It can do so much. It's so great. I did something the other day. I have a note for every Bookworm episode that we've recorded. And in the metadata at the top, I have the tags for the whole document, and then I have Mike : and Joe : so our ratings. And then there's this data view plugin, which I tell it, look at all the notes inside that Bookworm folder and sort them descending by Mike's rating. So it shows in a table all of the episodes with the links to the notes themselves, with all like the date it was published, who picked the book, what we covered. And then it also shows all your ratings and all of my ratings inside of Obsidian, and it auto updates as soon as I throw a new note in there.
Sure,
it's pretty great.
That's fascinating. Should we publish this thing? Is that publishable? Should we do that? I feel like you asked me about this at one point.
This one, I don't know. We could. I'm going to record a video for this though. It's going to be part of the course, but I'm also going to deliver it to the blog first. So I'll share that when it comes out, because it has a distinctly Bookworm angle to it. But it's super cool. And there's so much stuff you can do with that data view plugin specifically. The moment I opened that plugin, I'm like, this is for Joe. So you need to check that one out.
All right.
It's a plugin for the data obsessed, they say.
Okay. That's good to know. I will take a look at it for sure. But I haven't seen it yet. So I know that it exists, and I know that I did a live stream that was kind of an update on how I've been using Obsidian lately, and some folks were mentioning this data view plugin amongst a few others, and I have not followed up on all those action items yet, but I have a list and it's sitting right over there.
That's Joe's plugin, if there ever was a Joe's plugin.
All right. Good to know.
Shall we do some follow-up?
That we shall.
All right. So in order that we had them last time, did you figure out your procrastination review at the end of every day?
I did. This actually worked out really, really well. It was more successful than I expected that this would be. It's one that, and I don't even remember, you were going to do the procrastination log, right? So that's the method.
I was going to do that. Yes, I was.
I said was. I don't know if you actually have or not. We've not talked about this. There's that. But I was not going to go down that path because I didn't feel like I could identify the moments in time when I was procrastinating at that instant. So I opted to do an end of day review and just, here's what I think happened today. Here's how I feel like I procrastinated and in what ways and what caused that and how did I get there. I started doing some quick journal entries in my bullet journal that would keep track of this. And as it turns out, it works quite well. And I have noticed that there are a number of cases where I procrastinate and I'm not even aware that it happens after the fact, let alone in the moment. But I did have at least 3 or 4 days since we last recorded when I did this that I discovered afterwards that I procrastinated the entire day unknowingly. I accomplished things that I needed to get done. They just weren't what I was supposed to be doing that day. And I got the next day's tasks moved because I didn't work on it that first day. I said that weird, but you get my point. I learned after the fact what I was doing, and I was unaware of what was going on in the moment. So this is one that I feel like worked well for me. Again, I can't notice those things in the moment. So afterwards, very successful.
Cool.
Great fun.
Well, we'll get to mine here in a second, but you had another one. Did you figure out how to play?
I didn't really spend much time on this one because I don't know when to play at the This is the trick, right? Something I will point out though, that I think my wife and I, Becky and I, were talking about this last night, and we're in an apartment right now. I don't know that I've said this on any stream or anything, but we did submit an accepted offer on a house. So we have a house pending purchase currently. So we're still in an apartment, planning and prepping for whenever we close on a house, end of June. And the discussion that we had was that right now, because we're in an apartment, we don't have like all your normal house maintenance things. Like you can't just go do big projects and such. And the kids start to get a little antsy when they're in an apartment all day long, right? So we can't just open the back door and say, go play in the backyard, because that doesn't exist. You have to go with them, which means that you can't work on things on your own in the afternoon or the evenings when the kids are still around. So that means we're out with them a lot more than we were previously. And then we're doing our projects earlier in the morning or later at night when we normally wouldn't really do anything other than just blow time. So it's been kind of fascinating to see how that has morphed things, but it has meant that I've spent a lot more time in play mode with the kids than I have previously. And it's been kind of weird to see how that's been forced upon us without having any plan for it at all. So although I'm not one that's excited about living in an apartment, I can definitely see where there are some benefits of having this put upon us. There you go.
Nice.
So no formal play mode, but inadvertent accidental play mode has been activated. So
I like it.
I'm itching to know. I talked about the procrastination review. You have made a comment about your procrastination log. How did this go? Did you keep one?
It did not happen at all.
Aww.
Well, okay, so here's the deal. We record Bookworm and I get all excited about the benefits of identifying when I'm going to procrastinate. And then I get done and we sell 10 times as many copies of Zero to Obsidian as we thought we were going to. And then I freak out because I'm like, okay, now this thing has to be amazing. So basically, since we recorded the last episode, I have been feeling tremendous pressure, like a looming deadline where if you don't get this done, it's going to be a disaster. Except that as soon as I think that I'm done, I realize there's more I could do to make it awesome. And so I can't say no to that, and I just do it. This happens pretty much every year that I presented at MacStock too. It's not that big a deal, right? I could probably just show up and talk and everyone would be, hey, that's great. But I feel this internal pressure to just make something super awesome. So timing for this was just absolutely terrible for me because I guess you could say I worked on that as a form of procrastination, but it didn't feel like it. It more so felt like hurry up and get this thing done. And then the scope just kept changing by my own stupid fault, because I'm like, hey, instead of just walking through it, I will record all these videos.
Sure.
And that will save some time, which ultimately, I mean, the end product is better. I'm trying to get people from they've never even opened Obsidian to they're using it to solve a specific pain point in their note-taking workflow within 2 hours, which is already an ambitious goal. I don't want to waste anybody's time. I have to answer questions and give people time to work on stuff as we go. So I'm like, yeah, I just got to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did it, and I put in a lot of hours for that, but it's okay. It was great. It was worth it. I do want to try this again. I don't have anything specific. Like, I don't know. I've got some other things I'm brewing on as we read today's book. So maybe that will displace procrastination in terms of like what's important, what's priority for me right now. But I do.
Let me get this straight. You're going to procrastinate on your procrastination log.
Yeah,
I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Oh, that gives me an idea for another book. All right. I better write this down.
Okay. So I'm curious to see if you actually pull this off on the next round.
Yeah, we will see.
Okay.
The other one that I thought you would be more anxious to hear about would be, did I actually meditate this time?
I do want to know the answer to this.
I did with mixed success. The first day, because I'm trying to do it as part of the morning routine before I start work. And I opened up 10% happier on that Monday after we recorded and opened up the daily thing, and it was 20 minutes long. And I'm like, nope. Some of them, it's really weird. It depends on who the instructor is. Like, you can choose a different time length, but that was literally the shortest for the one for that day. And I was like, well, this is just not going to work. And I still had my Headspace subscription. So I went back and did the 5-minute Headspace one.
Yep.
And I think I did that 3 or 4 times since we recorded. I do think it's valuable. I'm going to try to make it stick. I feel like it's kind of at the point right now it could go either way. So if you remember next time, you can ask me about it. But
I'll give you grief next time.
Okay, sounds good.
Very fun.
Play every day. This one I did pretty good on. I know I mentioned like I was working a lot on this presentation for the Zero to Obsidian workshop. But we did also get an Xbox. I'm not sure if I mentioned this last time.
Why would you do such a thing?
Well, I have 4 boys who love video games. So I was the bearer of extremely great news when I walked in the door with an Xbox Series S a couple weeks ago.
Nice.
And I started doing just some poking around, like seeing... can you even get a PlayStation 5, a newer Xbox? And the answer pretty much is nope. And then I found a Xbox in stock at Green Bay. It's like half-hour away. And I just went up and got it.
Nice.
Because I could.
Nice.
Yeah. And so we've got that. It's new. And they have this service, Xbox Game Pass, I think they call it, where it has like the piece where you have to pay to play online, like that's Xbox Live, I think. That's always been, a certain cost. I think it's $10 a month or something like that. But for $15 a month, you also get Game Pass, which gives you access to a whole bunch, like 200 different games, including all of the EA ones, which are the ones that I like. So like the new FIFA, the new Madden, all that kind of stuff. So I've been trying to play like at least one game of FIFA, which is like 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Every day, which has been fun.
Nice.
And my kids absolutely love it. So
yeah, I think, when I was talking about the kids forcing us into playing, there's a game room at the apartment, and it has foosball and shuffleboard in there. And they love playing foosball. So every day when I'm home from work, Dad, can we go play foosball? It's like, so it's nice for me because it's not a video game. It's like, but it's an actual physical game they can go play. So Analog Joe just comes in and wins again. So there's that.
Well, on the topic of foosball, I've got a story here too.
Okay.
So we got a foosball table for Christmas. The last couple years, we've not gotten anybody individual gifts, but gotten family gifts. So 2 years ago, it was a ping pong table. And this last year, it was a foosball table.
Okay.
And everybody signs off on it. And they're like, yeah, that we want to do that. So it's not like, if they wake up in the morning, they're disappointed because they didn't get an individual gift from mom and dad. So we got this foosball table and we play it all the time. Toby, my oldest, is getting pretty good. He can beat me about half the time.
Okay.
And so we have this running joke that whoever wins when we play is king of the knobs.
Okay.
And I actually got a foosball trophy made. So it's got the foosball guy on top. And it actually says King of the Knobs, and now whoever wins gets to keep the trophy. It's a traveling trophy, but it never leaves our house.
Nice. That's pretty slick. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
King of the Knobs. That's good. That's good.
Shall we jump into today's book?
Yes. I think this will be a fun one.
Oh, this is going to be a fun one. This is longer than I remembered, so I apologize in advance.
Did you buy the updated version, or did you stick with the one you had?
I did, so now I know how to lead millennials.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
But that's what it says on my cover. Is that the one that you got?
Yep, because I had to buy it again, remember? Because my original is
that's right.
Buried in a storage unit somewhere, and I have no clue where it is. So there's that. So yes, I have the new version as well.
All right. Yeah, and I had gone through this before simply as an audiobook and read the real one this time. But this is Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek, author of Start With Why, which we had covered previously. A very different type of book than Start With Why. A very different type of book than almost anything that we've read, I would argue.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Because instead of the 3 parts that most books come in, this one has 8. And they are not... if you look at the mind map for this one, it's kind of weird looking. It balances out, but there are some sections like section 5 that have tons of notes, and there are some sections like section 8 which are very, very short. And then also what's kind of weird about this is that the very beginning of the book, the introduction, that is where the title comes from. And so if you don't read the introduction, you're like, well, where does Leaders Eat Last come in?
Right. You can easily get confused, for sure.
Yeah, so in fact, I thought I had read the introduction, and then I was getting to the end of the book, and I'm trying to recall like that story that they tell in the introduction. I'm like, did I just miss that? I don't see it in my mind map. And then I went back like, oh, that's where it was. I didn't realize like that was the whole extent of that, because that was a really big thing in my memory of when I listened to the book. I'll just start here with the introduction before we tackle it part by part. There's no way we're going through all the different chapters. But this introduction is written by a Lieutenant General of the Marine Corps, George Flynn, and it's only a couple of pages, but talks about how if you watch Marines when they eat, the leaders always eat last. They make sure all of their guys go through the chow line first. And so that is the basis of the title. And the big idea you can extrapolate from that is that leadership is not about you and your privilege. It's about serving the people that are underneath you and prioritizing them, which if that's the only thing you got out of this book, I'd argue it's already worth it.
Correct.
But that's just the tip of the iceberg.
It is. It is. And it's so true though, right? And I even think about, I was always told growing up that I needed to let everyone else go through the line first. Never really thought much about it. I just followed through with what I was told. But it is fascinating now with like our small group. We have dinner every time our small group gets together. And all of the guys have the same mentality. So it's like this fight of who's going to get forced through the line before someone else. Usually the one who wins is whoever's the host of of the event. But it's interesting how like, well, what happens if you've got multiple people that are like on top of each other at that point? But that aside, you're correct. Yeah, it seems very fascinating to see like the people who are top-notch leaders are at the end of the line, not necessarily at the beginning of the line.
Yep. And so this is, I guess, a leadership book. You could also say it is a business book because it does talk a lot about leadership in organizations and corporations specifically. I think we'll probably talk about like the GE approach versus the Costco approach. That's later on. But let me just real briefly run down these different sections here. So part 1 is our need to feel safe. Part 2 is called Powerful Forces. Part 3 is titled Reality. Part 4 is How We Got Here. Part 5, The Abstract Challenge. Part 6, Destructive Abundance. Part 7, A Society of Addicts. And Part 8, Becoming a Leader. Okay, and then there's something like 30 different chapters here. We're just going to tackle these section by section. And try to crank through them quickly because there is a lot of meat in this book.
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time on this one.
Yeah, this could be 5 separate episodes, to be honest, based on how much is in here. But we're not going to do that. We're going to keep it hopefully to an hour and a half.
Good luck.
So part 1, our need to feel safe. The big ideas here, I think, are the circle of safety he talks about in chapter 3. And there's a visual here where he's got the circle and inside it says safe, and then danger is like on the outsides. And so that is a common theme throughout the rest of the book. Is, as a leader, what you want to do is develop this circle of safety for the people that you lead. And there's different versions of this visual as we go here. He shares a couple cool stories. The book starts with a pretty intense story about Johnny Bravo, who's flying an A-10 for a support mission, and he just hears the chatter on the radio, feels like he's supposed to go in, can't see anything, goes in anyways, and ends up saving a bunch of people's lives because he's able to give them cover fire at the exact spot that they needed, even though he can't see anything. He's just kind of trusting his gut. And the end of that chapter is kind of like, where do people like Johnny Bravo come from? And that's the guy's nickname. So that is kind of like the picture in your head as you go through the rest of the book of like, this is what he's picturing as a leader, this person who is taking a risk and doing something that could end up meaning disaster for themselves because they just feel like they need to jump in and help these other people who are in danger. So, what did you think about this story? Blake is saying in the chat, that story is so wrong in so many ways.
Yeah.
I'm not a pilot, so I don't
I have no clue, but knowing Blake comes from the military and is a current pilot, like, okay. I was reading your comment, Blake, and I just couldn't help but think, I wonder what is going on there, but I'll do a little more research on it now because I'm very curious. But this is the both the difficulty and the benefit of how authors tell stories, right? And
yeah,
this is like they have a specific thing that they're trying to call out. They very likely can't tell you all the detail because they don't want to take up that much space to tell the story, because it would probably be the entire book if they gave you absolutely everything about it. But it's difficult to know where details should or shouldn't be brought in. And the other thing you have to rely on in the midst of trying to tell these stories is your source of where you got the story can be sometimes tainted a little bit, and you may not know it. And people who have been around the story for many years, many different sources have come into them, they would know immediately that your story isn't 100%, but you may not know that, and by the time you figure it out, it's too late and printed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's what happened here. I don't know. Haven't dug into the story, so I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that if the story has any semblance of truth, it's fascinating, and it makes a good point, even if it is a fiction retelling. I think the value behind it is still there, right? Sometimes your instincts tell you need to act. Whether you know how safe or how real the danger is, you don't know. But if your instincts tell you to act, you're better off following through on those. Like that's kind of what I got from it, I guess. There's a lot of different ways you could come at it.
If you want to dive in deep and figure out where these stories are, he's got tons of resources for you in the back. So I just looked up that one for part 1, that Flying Over the Thick Clouds. The sources for this are a TED Talk that was recorded May 2012, and he's got the URL by Mike Drowley. That's the pilot. And then also he did an interview with Mike Drowley in April and June of 2013. And there are a lot of these sources in here where it just says author's interview with.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
He didn't just dig up a bunch of stories in an archive somewhere. Like, he actually talked to a lot of these people,
Yep.
which is kind of crazy when you see how many stories are in here.
Right.
I mean, we may have a new contender for the best storyteller between Simon Sinek and Ryan Holiday here.
Oh, easy. I mean, he's up there with Ryan Holiday on this, right? So
yeah,
Ryan Holiday was a master at finding the stories you've never heard and then telling them impeccably well. Simon Sinek has done his research. I'll say that.
Yeah, I will say it would be easy not to dive in and look at all of his sources. If you just read this, it reads very much like he is cherry picking specific details from the stories to support his point. But when you realize how much research went into this, I feel like that kind of negates that criticism a little bit. But yeah, I mean, obviously he's got a message he's trying to get across, so he's going to pick some stories. But I don't think it's any worse than what Ryan Holiday did. I think the same criticism you could use there too. And all of these stories are told really, really well. He does a great job of condensing these stories into short little snippets too, because there are so many of them. I mean, even in this first section, he talks about this guy, Bob Chapman, who comes in, he buys these distressed companies, and then he starts sitting in the cafeteria and listening to employees, and he actually starts implementing some of the feedback that he gets from them. They're shocked because no one's ever listened to them before, and so the whole organization goes from we're about to go under to we're doing really, really well.
Yep.
Just because he's showing empathy to the people that actually work there. It's kind of crazy. I also like with the circle of safety, one other story he told here about the Spartans' warrior strength. So Spartans were, I believe, the Greek warriors with the big shields, and I've understood a little bit about these warriors before, but there was a detail here that I thought was fascinating. He said that if you lost your helmet or your breastplate, there wasn't any major repercussions for that. But if you lost your shield, you lost all citizenship rights because your helmet and your breastplate you use when you are defending yourself, but the shield you use when you are defending each other. And I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to me. And there are a lot of stories like that, especially from the military. Like the whole leaders eat last thing. If they run out of food, it's the leader who doesn't eat, right?
Exactly. Yep.
The thing here is that whenever the actions, and there's a story later on too of an officer who fell asleep on the watch, but they were debating taking him out of the officer in training.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Process and system, right? That's in a later chapter at a different reason. But the purpose behind that was, yes, he fell asleep. He was in the woods of Virginia. Not a big deal, but when he was called out on it, he denied it multiple times until irrefutable proof was shown to him. That was why.
And then he said, I'd like to take responsibility for my actions. And they're like, too late, buddy.
That's way too late. You're a step behind now. This is not going to fly. So much of this book is about the process of leaders taking responsibility without being caught and being willing to take the fall whenever something goes awry. I've had people explain it to me as like, something may not be my fault, but it's my responsibility.
Yeah.
So someone else may cause something bad to happen, but it's my responsibility to take care of it. So that, I feel like, is one of the foundations that comes out here. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot to be said for this process of being aware and being empathetic to those who are, quote unquote, underneath of you in the hierarchy.
Yeah, and on that topic, let's go into the next section here, part 2, Powerful Forces, because there is a fascinating story here about a company, I believe it's called Next Jump, which basically hires people for life. They don't fire people. When someone messes up, they get coached. And this is kind of an idea that he extends throughout the rest of the book, comes up again and again, of you can't fire a family member. You can't fire your kids. And he uses that specifically because he knows it's going to elicit a strong reaction from people like, how could you even suggest something like that? But that's kind of what happens in these organizations and companies, is that people will give their whole life to a company, and then the manager is focused on the numbers, not the people, and just lets the person go. So this is his story of this company that got this revelation, and they're like, no, we're just going to change the way that we do business, and we're not going to fire anybody, because the founder, Charlie Kim, believed that running a business or running a company is like raising children. And it was kind of cool to see like the metrics with this, because you would think, well, if you can't fire anybody, when things get bad, you're going to lose a ton of money. And they actually went from, this was a tech company. They went from 25% growth to 60% growth when they started doing this. And they also used to have 40% turnover in their staff, which is an insanely high number when you think about all the costs associated with the hiring process and doing the interviews and finding, people to fill the positions and then training them up to do the job specifically that they were hired for. It's kind of crazy when you think about how much you have to invest in that. And that just basically gets thrown out the window when you're thinking about, well, do we keep this person or not?
Yeah, there's a lot of difficult pieces with that one, I think, because you have to make the decision up front. What was the company that did the lifetime employment policy where once you were hired, you could not be fired if the company...
That was Next Jump.
Was that them? Okay. Because with that policy, it meant that you couldn't get fired for your actions or the company's lack of performance. And two things went through my head. One, what happens if somebody's just really good in the interviews, manages to get hired, and then just doesn't do anything? That's what went through my head on one side, because, people are people, and they're not always genuine and good at what they're... like, they're not always honest and authentic. And so that was one thing that went through my head. The other was, it's fascinating to me that a policy like that has such positive effects, because it's purely my job is not ever at risk because of me speaking up or the company doing poorly. And it means that because of that trust, like, okay, take my situation. I work for a church, right? Churches generally don't fire people. Like, just going to say that. They just generally don't. So they want to be nice. They want to be kind. They want to be inclusive to a lot of people. They generally don't fire. And in my role, I'm extremely confident in my position. I don't see it being canceled or cut for many, 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 many years. And that puts me in a spot where I don't feel like me causing a stink over something that I think is wrong. I don't feel like that's going to jeopardize my role. I also don't think that there's really, outside of like stealing or something like royally terrible, would actually lead me to being fired in any way. So because I have that trust and because I have that confidence in my job, I have a tendency to be a lot more creative and a lot more... I push the boundaries of what we should or could do in the future to help the ministries of the church. Where I think if I was nervous about going too far or making a suggestion or pushing on a project that I thought potentially might fail and then reflect poorly on me and then potentially jeopardize my job, I don't think I would push near as hard. I don't think I would try to be as daring with some of the stuff that I do, that I would actually kind of just sit back and coast more than try to innovate. If you follow what I'm getting at. So I think that trust and what they're doing with this lifetime employment policy is actually really, really smart, but it requires you to be spot on with your hiring whenever you go down that path, for sure.
Yeah, you definitely have to be slow to hire and make sure that you're getting the right person. I think he does mention that there have been a couple of occasions where somebody has just... they're leaving the company for whatever reason. Maybe they did do something like completely against the company culture, but whenever they do that, they don't just like cut them loose either. If someone wants to leave, basically, then they help them find a new position because they're prioritizing the individual. So I don't think it's like 100% once you're in, that's it. I think they probably do have a few scenarios where they would be willing to say, we got to go our separate ways. But when they do that, they're going to help the person land on their feet. And then the speaking freely part that you were talking about, that's the result of that circle of safety, right? Which is the other thing in this chapter, he talks about these 4 chemicals that affect our happiness. And 2 of them, serotonin and oxytocin, those are selfless chemicals that keep that circle of safety strong. I actually found this part pretty fascinating because I love all this brain science stuff.
Yep. I spent a lot of time on this part and actually reread some of these pieces just because it's like, oh, neuroscience. Yay.
Yep.
That was my
exactly
kid in a candy store moment.
Oh, you just gave me another idea for another book.
Oh, okay.
But I'll just run through these real quickly. So the 4 chemicals he talks about are endorphins, which exist to mask physical pain. He talks about the runner's high being an example of this, and also the fact that laughing releases endorphins, which I thought was interesting. Dopamine, which is the one that you and I are probably the most familiar with because that one gets brought up in the productivity space all the time. That's the one that brings satisfaction after we finish something important, causes us to be goal-oriented, but it also fuels addictions, whether those be substance abuse or something like social media. Serotonin is the leadership chemical. This is the one thing that drives the feeling of pride when we feel people like or respect us. So the people who do something, graduation, big accomplishment, whatever, they get up on stage, and they feel they thank somebody. I couldn't have done it without them. That's serotonin on display. And then oxytocin, that's the feeling of friendship, love, or deep trust. This is the one that's kind of responsible for those warm, fuzzy feelings. Without this one, we don't perform acts of generosity. This is the one that makes us social. This one is also long-lasting, which is interesting because dopamine is kind of the opposite. That's the one where you get instant gratification, then you feel like you need another hit. So basically, you can be driven by those endorphins and dopamine. Those are the reasons that we hunt, we gather, we achieve. Though he calls those the progress chemicals. But then serotonin and oxytocin, those are the selfless ones that keep that circle of safety strong, and these are actually the ones that make a big impact in the long term.
Yeah, I wasn't real sure what to do with how to act on a lot of this because we've studied and read a lot about endorphins and dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin. Like we've read about these in many books in the past. They come up in a variety of ways. They're the 4 chemicals that we generally hear about. At the same time, since I being down the ADD path and taking medication for that, like I've stepped into a lot of this science to a pretty deep level in my specific scenario. And the only thing I really want to add to this in this particular piece is like it lines up with a lot of what I've seen. Like it all just makes sense and fell right in the same path and in the same vein that a lot of my external research has led me to as well. So it's an encouragement in that, he's done a good job, I would say, with this, because apparently Simon Sinek just spends his days researching and studying and interviewing and such. So that's kind of what I've
project
learned.
Anyways.
Yeah, he obsessed over this one. You can tell.
Yep. The next section is part 3, reality, and this is basically talking about how all of these chemicals and the roles that they fulfilled for us when we were running around as cavemen trying to bring down wild animals, how they're not really suited for today's culture. In fact, there's a chapter in this section called A Snowmobile in the Desert. And he kind of talks about how a snowmobile in the desert, you can actually move, but it's not made for that environment. So it's going to be slow. It's going to take a lot more effort than is warranted. And so he's kind of equating this with the modern workplace, modern culture, and saying there's a better way to do this. There's not a whole lot I want to talk about in this section. Happy to discuss anything you found in here, but a couple interesting things I saw. Just a stat that the self-help industry is an $11 billion per year industry. That is a lot of money that people are spending on self-improvement. And then also in the previous chapter, The Courage to Do the Right Thing, he talks about how trust needs to be reciprocal. You can't have one-way trust in a group. That's not valuable. So the people that are being led need to trust their leader, but the leader needs to trust the people also. It has to be a two-way relationship. Otherwise, it's just not going to work, because ultimately what we need to trust the people around us, that not only are they going to do the right thing at the right time, not only are they going to obey the rules, but also, like Johnny Bravo at the very beginning, that they know when they need to break them as well for the good of the group.
Yes. I don't think there's much I want to add to this particular one, just that, the part is called reality, and just keeping things down to earth and being aware of what's really going on as opposed to what you want to have been going on. You mentioned the self-help industry, and we probably don't help people with that much. Like, we create things that people spend to be better people. Like, we're the type of people who do that. And, that's not a bad thing, but at the same time, I often wonder, like, where's the line there? At what point do we need to stop doing the research and buying courses and buying things that help us become better people? And I'm saying that knowing that both of us have at least part of our income, if not all of our income, from that, right? So I have to be a little careful with that. But you have to, at some point, you have to stop and work on building your own systems and pay attention to yourself. Like the meditate thing that you've been doing, Mike. Stop, pay attention to why you're acting or not acting on something. Why do you not do those items on your task list? Why is that? It's not the tool. I would argue it's rarely the tool that...
I'm busy procrastinating.
Correct. Like, there's too much other stuff that you're focusing on that you shouldn't be. So it's rarely going to be the app, the software you choose. It's rarely going to be that. It has more to do with the concepts and mindsets that you bring to it. That, I think, is what he's getting at here, is that concept of, don't assume that you need to make one change and then all your woes will disappear. You need to stop and be a little bit introspective here and pay attention to yourself and how, like, the brain chemicals, like, how are those impacting you and how are you taking advantage of those? I think that's what he's calling you to pay attention to here.
What I got out of this was a little bit different, I think. I think he's saying that we have a tendency, based on our neocortex, which is constantly driving us to learn and to achieve, to be isolated. But we are, in fact, social animals, and trust is the lubrication, going back to the snowmobile in the desert, that allows you to move.
Right.
So we spend a lot of money trying to make ourselves better, but really, if we want to make ourselves better, we got to make everybody in our circle of safety better, and we don't look there very often. The other thing I want to just real quick mention, because you did bring up that we are in this self-help industry. I think the thing I hear all the time from people is that they buy these courses, but they don't go through them. So the big challenge for someone who actually wants to help somebody affect positive change in their life is help them actually go through it. And it's interesting because you see all of these people now who are doing these cohort-based classes. You can't just buy access to the course because they want to force you essentially down the path of, we're going to do this together because I know you're not going to do it if I leave you to do it on your own.
Correct. Yes, absolutely, 100%.
Which is kind of the thought behind the Zero to Obsidian workshop, to be honest, is I want to create not only a 2-hour, it was intended to be 2 hours, it ended up being 3, workshop where I share a bunch of information, but you're actually going to work on this as we go. Because if you just watch everything and then assume you're going to do it later, it's never going to happen. And I fall into this trap too. But I think for people like us who are trying to help people to reach their full potential, that's the current state of things, is like, it's not enough just to share the information anymore. You can't just write the book and throw it out there and assume that a bunch of bookworms like us are actually going to read it, because most people won't.
Right.
You got to hold their hand and help them walk through it. which is very contradictory to a lot of our culture today, which is kind of the whole idea behind part 4, how we got here. I apologize if I offend people in advance, but this is Simon, not me. He basically blames all of this stuff on the baby boomer generation.
Totally. Completely. He totally throws the boomers under the bus here. Like, it's not even
Yes, he does.
sugar-coated. It's just, you guys screwed this all up. That's pretty much what he's saying.
Yes, but he does say that it wasn't because of bad intentions. So the whole story here, chapter 11 is the boom before the bust, talks about how in the 1920s there was a period of unprecedented wealth, and then there was a big depression that hit in 1929 after Black Tuesday. That lasted until Pearl Harbor, when the U.S. was pulled into World War II. During World War II, this is a fascinating statistic, 12% of the population served in the military, which was way higher than I had anticipated. And that is the generation that in the U.S. is known as the greatest generation, because they were marked by service and hardship. We were all in this together, not excess and consumerism, which is kind of where we find ourselves today. Now, that greatest generation, they didn't want their kids to have to go through the same thing they went through. So when they had kids, that baby boomer generation, which caused a 40% growth in the population, they were growing up in a different world. And it's natural, I think, to want to set your kids up for success. So they did that. And as the boomers grew older, they tried to preserve, again, Simon's words, they selfishly tried to preserve the world that they had created. Okay, so then we get into the 1980s. Things start to become more disposable. August 5th, 1981, he says that's the day where we really embraced layoffs for the first time. President Reagan orders all of the air traffic controllers back to work. The effect of that strike wasn't as severe as they thought. When they didn't show up, he fires 11,359 air traffic controllers on August 5th. And then the unintended effect of that, Simon's words, but I can see the connection here, is that CEOs think they can do the same thing that the president just did. So now we've got a new trend where you've got the baby boomer generation who has risen the ranks of these businesses and these organizations. They're trying to preserve their world as they know it, and they're focused on the numbers and the comfort and the wealth. And so people become the disposable resource. And the big problem with all of this is that we start to dehumanize people. Very different than the next jump story that we read about several chapters earlier.
And this is the process by which trust is eroded. And that circle that we were referring to starts to dissolve. And once those two things have happened, guess what? We sit in a very stressful, unhappy scenario because we don't feel like we can let go and say something quite wrong or make the wrong move. We feel like we have to be absolutely perfect, because unless we are perfect, that whole world can come crumbling down. And we could be without a job, we could be without a house, you could be in a lot of really scary scenarios if you don't keep up absolutely perfectly. And that leads to the cortisol, stress hormone. Does he talk about that in this section? I started to get these blended together.
That was in the previous section with the EDSO. He does talk about cortisol, but there's just so much in here.
Right.
I skipped over that one.
This is off topic here, but normally we have these 3-part books, right? And it's easy for me to know what came from which part whenever they're like that. But when it's an 8-part, it's like, wait, where did that come from? I took notes and I have them here, but I don't remember which part that came from. So maybe
he is a master at weaving these things together too. It's not just I'm telling you this so that I can reference it in the end. He references these things all the time as he's going. And it's not like he's referencing a single idea all the time. All of these stories he's referencing, it's like a patchwork quilt that's perfectly put together.
Yeah, and because of that, I get lost. So, wait, where is that again? I don't remember, but it's in there. Anyway, My point is that whenever you lose that circle, when that dissolves and your trust is out the window, the stress hormones start to kick in because you feel like you're on your own, which, as we see today with all of the necessary and required isolations, like we've seen how that just completely destroys the mental state of so many people. Like some folks are okay, at least for a period, but after a while, that isolation becomes a really, really toxic thing. Some of that's because of this.
Oh man, that would be a fascinating addendum. You know
Oh,
how like
absolutely.
Bowling Alone had that appendix for like the COVID
Yep.
stuff. That would be great to hear Simon talk about how that has affected all of the social chemicals
Absolutely.
and things, how that's all out of whack.
I would love to see that because, I mean, you think about it, whenever you're in isolation and you have to do things on your own, when you go completely independent and you become you put yourself in a spot where other people aren't necessary, stress skyrockets.
Yeah.
Whether you realize it or not. So whenever you have people around you and friends and those groups of people who can be a support for you, a lot of what he's talking about here goes away. But that only happens when that social network is there, which we do talk about here in a little bit. But that whole scenario of that subgroup is super important because it helps alleviate the stress and the cortisol and such.
Yeah. And this kind of gets into the isolation thing. When you don't have those connections, some scary stuff can happen. The next section is part 5, the abstract challenge. And the first chapter in here, Abstraction Kills, he talks about this study that they did after they had apprehended the guy who basically architected the Holocaust. He escaped to Argentina, I think it was, and lived there for a while. And then in 1961, they caught him, and then that renewed these questions of like, well, how could the Holocaust have possibly happened? Are people that evil? And so they did this experiment. I have a hard time even talking about this one. So basically the experiment, there were two groups, and they basically thought they were both the teacher group. One group was told to flip a switch to administer an electric shock to the other person when they got a wrong answer. Now, no shocks were actually sent, but the other group was told they were the teachers, so they were acting like they were getting shocked when this switch was flipped. Okay, and then they had a couple different ways that they administered these shocks. One where they had to take the person's hand and put it on the shock plate. One where they flipped the switch and they could hear the person responding in the next room. And one where they could not hear the person, they could just hear him like banging on the wall to get him to stop. The shocks themselves went up in increments from like you can barely feel this until the very top, which they were labeled different things. And remember, there's no shocks actually being sent, but the very last ones were like XXX, basically this is strong enough to kill somebody. And they were supposed to administer a shock whenever someone got a question wrong. So they administer these shocks, and then they would express some hesitation, and the scientist in the room had a series of questions or statements that they would reply with. At first, they would say, please continue. And then as shocks get stronger, the other person's freaking out more. They say, the experiment requires that you continue. The third time, it is absolutely essential that you continue. And then the fourth one, you have no other choice. You must go on. Now, when they started this, the hypothesis was that 2 to 3%, there'd be a couple deranged individuals who would go all the way and administer the top level shock where they would actually kill somebody. Again, remember, no shocks being sent.
No people actually killed in this experiment.
Yes. But what they found was that when they had to put the person's hand on the plate, physically grab the person's hand, put it on the plate, 30% of the people who were in this experiment still went all the way to the end with this. When they could hear the person in the other room crying for help, 40% still went all the way through with this. When they couldn't see or hear the person just like them banging on the walls or whatever. 65% of the people went all the way with this. And I'd love to sit here and say, well, that's appalling and there's no way I would do that. But I think what the big takeaway from this is that people they have a lot less empathy than we thought they did. And when again, realize the intention of this experiment was to figure out how something like the Holocaust could have happened. Well, there's your evidence. You have a leader who is saying this is the way things have to be. You don't really have a choice. And then you have a whole bunch of people who really believe that they don't have a choice, and they view that they dehumanize the other side in the conflict. You can totally see how we ended up where we did.
Yeah, because if you take that to the extreme here, when you don't actually see the results of the decision that you're making, you may hear of it or be aware of it, but when it's abstracted one level and you don't actually see the results, it's real easy to keep going. Because if you take the empathy route here, yes, you could say they're not showing empathy for the other person because of that abstraction. But the other element here is that they're showing empathy to the research person who's behind them, telling them they must continue, because they're showing empathy to them because they need it done. It's like, well, I don't want to upset them, and I can see them. They're right here beside me. So I'm going to follow them over this person that all they're doing is banging on the wall. I don't actually know what's going on over there. So who knows? But it's kind of scary. And that's part of, I think, why we talk about corporate executives, right? We like to, give them a lot of grief for these horrific decisions that they make occasionally. It's like, how could you come up with that? Like, well, this is why. Because they're so many steps removed from the end result of the decisions that they're making that it's really, really difficult to get a read on what all the nuances and subtleties are of a decision that you're making, because it's so far abstracted from what you're seeing today. So the only way to really combat this is put boots on the ground and actually go see things, right? But that's not always possible. So then you're kind of left in this whole, now what do I do scenario. So yeah, what do you do, Mike? I don't know.
Yeah, they said in this study, the ones who actually did quit before they reached the end, those were the ones who felt that they were responsible to a higher authority other than the scientists that were in the room.
Yep.
So kind of what you said, if the person that you are responsible to, your authority, is the person in front of you, your leader, it's very easy to see how you end up doing things that you never would have thought that you would have done. And then as the leader, you have to take into consideration the people below you. Like, it's not just you. You're not just trying to get as much as you can. That's kind of the next chapter, the modern abstraction. He talks about businesses, and he uses Apple. Simon Sinek loves to use Apple as an example.
Oh, he does. He's a Apple fanboy.
Yeah, but this is not an Apple fanboy story, because he's talking about Tim Cook and how they were keeping the European profits in Ireland to avoid paying taxes. And Tim Cook on the stand basically says, unfortunately, the tax code has not kept up with the digital age. Like, not my fault. I'm a corporation.
Yep.
My job is to maximize my profits while playing within the rules.
Yep.
And
your rules don't catch me. So here we are.
Yes.
Yep.
And then he goes from there to telling the story of the Titanic, which was owned by the Oceanic Steam Navigation Company. And the Titanic was 4 times bigger than any other ferry, but that's the classification that it fell underneath. So they had these rules for the number of lifeboats that had to be on these ferry vessels, which the Titanic is not a ferry, but it was classified as a ferry. So the end result, obviously, it hits the iceberg. It met the requirements of the law. It actually exceeded the requirements of the law. But still, they don't have enough lifeboats for everybody, and 1,500 of the 2,224 passengers and crew end up dying. And this is just mind-boggling when I think about this, because you can see that example, that story, and there were some details there that I had not known previously. You can see the Tim Cook thing. And you can see also how like nothing is being done to fix this sort of stuff. It just keeps happening over and over and over again, and it's super frustrating.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me to see how people like try to manipulate laws and codes and stuff. I'm in the middle of buying a house, right? So there are so many scenarios where it's like, okay, we know this, we could do that, but if we say this in a certain way, the county and the state are going to make us do all these things. The seller and you are both okay with it, so let's just keep it behind the scenes and we'll just handle it that way. And you sign some papers for arbitration and stuff so that if it actually goes awry, you're both able to get somebody there to sort through it. It's like, well, all they're doing is playing the game with all the rules and regulations. That's all they're doing is navigating their way through this to get the sale done in a way that all parties are happy. That's all they're trying to do. It's very similar to what we're talking about here. There are a lot of ways that you can technically follow rules and yet deviate from the intent of those rules, right? So the thing that you want to do, depending on where you land on this, is follow the intent. If you want to be a top-notch leader, follow the intent because that builds trust. Even if the rules allow you to skirt around it, if you follow the purpose behind them, people will tend to trust the integrity that you're showing in that process. The other one I think about is whenever, and I've seen this happen too many times, when a company isn't hitting their profit goals, so they go to layoffs to cut expenses so that they can hit those, and they know that certain departments and stuff can be cut. They know who can be cut when. They keep very close tabs on that, it seems, and they choose to cut people who have upcoming retirements and pensions because those will be even more expensive. Now, granted, there are a lot of laws and stuff that prevent that to some degree, but there are still ways around that. And these upper leadership positions will sometimes take advantage of those loopholes in order to let people go that feels like a complete kick in the gut. But that that destroys the trust in your employees whenever that stuff happens. That's not the way to do it, like following and trying to skirt the code so that you can get what you want, as opposed to following the intention behind it. It's not good. You're not a great leader when that happens.
Yeah, and that is kind of, your point is echoed in the story in the next section. So part 6 is destructive abundance, and chapter 18, he talks about Stanley O'Neill taking over at Merrill Lynch. And he prefaces this whole story by saying that leaders who focus on their own wealth and power are more like tyrants than leaders. And then talks about how that's basically what happened at Merrill Lynch. Stanley O'Neill was so focused on profitability, completely changed the culture. No one trusts anyone anymore. And when the leader is wrong in a top-down culture like that, the whole thing goes off the cliff. And so that's where he talks about getting the authority to those who are closest to the information. I saw the image that you tweeted out prior to recording about how do you lead from the bottom up. I think that's kind of what this is speaking to. And again, there's a visual to go along with this, but the people at the top of an organization are typically the ones that have the authority. The ones at the bottom who really need to be able to make the decisions, they're the ones who have all the information about what's actually going on. So in the story of Merrill Lynch, what you get is somebody at the top who has all of the authority to make all these layoffs, to make all these decisions because they're focused on these numbers and they don't really realize the implications of what they're doing. And all the people who can see what's really going on, they can do absolutely nothing about it. So what do? You try to put yourself in an organization where that authority has been delegated down to the lower levels of the organization so you can make those decisions based on the information that you have because people trust you enough to make the right decision. And at that point, it's kind of a virtuous circle, but also it could work the other way as well.
Yes, completely. 100%. I'm with you. I don't know what else to add on that one, but yes.
There's another story in this section, which I want to get to in chapter 20, which is the reason that Leaders Eat Last keeps coming up in my brain. This is where they talk about the political culture and how it all changed when Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House in 1994 when the Republicans had taken control of it, because he changed a bunch of things, including that House members that previous to this, they had spent most of their time in Washington doing what they were elected to do. And so all of the people who lived in Washington, they went to the same schools, they went to the same churches, they saw people outside of the debate floor. And Newt Gingrich changed that and sent people to their home districts where they spend a lot of time fundraising, a very selfish activity, so that they could get reelected for next time, so they could maintain their majority and just ram their agenda down people's throats. And now we see that on both sides. But he tells a cool story there about a Democrat and a Republican specifically, who they were in Washington together and they were at this thing and they had nothing else to do at the time. So they just started hanging out and they got to be really good friends. And then they started empathizing with the other person, even on the debate floor. And so they would go along with something that the other person had said and their whole party would get mad at them. I thought that was kind of funny. But this I can totally see how this has gotten to the point that it has. And I believe Simon Sinek when he says this is where it started. But even if it's not really that important. You can see kind of how things have started to go off of the rails. And he shares that in January of 2013, U.S. Congress actually had a lower approval rate than used car salesmen or even Genghis Khan at 14%, because the whole focus is on fighting your enemies, getting your way, right? And he makes the point that enemies fight, but friends cooperate. Cooperation, by the way, doesn't mean that you always agree, but it means that you're willing to work together for the greater good. And I mean, you can apply that in a lot of different scenarios, not just politics, but I found this whole story here extremely fascinating.
It amazes me, that abstraction thing, right? Whenever you have someone who disagrees with you, but you never actually talk to, it's real easy to be mad at them at unacceptable levels, right? This is seen in our society at ridiculous amounts today, just because we don't really want to get to be friends with someone if they have even one thing we disagree on. For whatever reason, we've decided that if we disagree on one thing, we cannot be friends at all. Even if it's, you like cats, I like dogs. Like, what? What's that got to... whatever. That seems to be an extrapolation of this concept to an extreme level. And I think it comes down to when we're not around people who disagree with us, there's never a point at which you can show empathy to them and try to understand their viewpoint. Thus, we end up in the situations we are today. And I wish it was easier to just say, I know you and I don't agree, but let's get together and work through it and talk about it, right? I have multiple friends that we don't agree on politics. We don't agree on many social issues, but we both share something, and I would consider us good friends. You know, I can think of at least 4 or 5 people off the top of my head that fit that description. I understand their viewpoint, and I don't necessarily always have arguments for them, but there's not always an opportunity for a lot of people to have those discussions. And when you have legislation that allows the political realm to follow suit with that and not force some of this compromise ability, and you allow people to not be around each other ever until you're at the front line having a war, like, how do you expect compromise and how do you expect cross-party support to ever happen when there is no need and there's no interest in that? Thus, we have such a strong desire for seats in a house for one party or the other, because the assumption is blue or red, you're going to vote to party lines because there's no point in ever crossing that line. So apparently this is something that I get excited about because I've been talking about it for a long time. So now I'm going to quit. Here you go, Mike.
Well, it's kind of interesting because the news as we record this is that the Supreme Court, which has a conservative majority, they've had a couple of decisions recently where they've been unanimous, and it hasn't been in the conservative court's favor.
Yep.
And so everybody's kind of like, well, what's going on here? Because there's this talk of like this whole concept of packing the court. And I think they're trying to send the message like, that's ridiculous. Just shut up and work together.
Yes. Yes.
See, it can be done. But it's interesting the way Simon Sinek describes it, because it just seems so obvious, right? Like, this is how we got here. Surely we can find a logical way out of this. But he tells another version of this in the next section, part 7, A Society of Addicts, kind of like the political thing where he's laying it all out and like, this is how we got here. He does the exact same thing with news when he talks about the Communications Act of 1934. And this is my other favorite story in the entire book. So this Communications Act, this required broadcasters to have a license. And in order to get a license, you had to meet a whole bunch of requirements. It was up for renewal, I think, every 5 years. One of those requirements was that you had to have public service programming. So that is where the nightly news came from. It was inserted as public service programming. It was not a business decision. And then in 1979, ABC debuts Nightline as this big thing was going on where militants stormed an American embassy in Tehran and they took 52 different hostages. In the book, Simon talks about how that whole scenario lasted 444 days in a row. And so Nightline was covering this every single night, and it was getting crazy ratings. And at the same time, other networks were taking notice, and they started to view news as being profitable. Then this guy, Mark Fowler, takes over the FCC. He removes this fairness doctrine, it's called, in 1987, which we should totally bring this back, because this is what prevented a network from advocating only one perspective. Almost every network I can think of right now promotes only one perspective.
Right.
And that's, Simon is tracing it back to this event because he's saying that this is when networks start to become more polarizing because it's good for business. And again, like, you look at this and you're like, oh, come on. Can't you guys figure this out? But yeah.
Yeah.
It is fascinating, I think, to understand how we got where we are. And I do think that helps you, no matter what news source you look to realize that this is only one side of the coin, because they have chosen this side because this is the profitable side for them. And one of the things I've been trying to do recently is just aggregate my news sources from both ends of the spectrum. And I'm not going to prioritize one or the other. I'm going to hold both of them lightly and realize that they've both got their own business interests at hand. And so really nothing of what they're telling me is the complete truth. It's probably somewhere in between. But it's fascinating to see the headlines as they appear on one site versus the other.
And it also, like, I don't remember which one it was. Maybe it was a local thing. We were talking about it this morning, about there was a news source that spun a whole thing and made a big deal out of a particular topic. I'm not going to go into the details because it'll trigger somebody. But they made a big deal out of something, and their base source was an article from the Babylon Bee. If you know the Babylon Bee, you know it's like a parody made up thing. Like, it's not real. It's fake, but it's fun, right? And it's pretty popular because it's spot on with some of the fun that it has. But they used the Babylon Bee as a source for a very real news system that spun a story and drove a bunch of clicks and drove a bunch of ratings, and it's completely fabricated. There was absolutely no truth to it whatsoever. Come on. Like, we could do better than this. Absolutely, we could.
Yeah. Well, one other thing in this section, this is kind of out of order, but the first chapter in this section, chapter 22, is at the center of all our problems is us. And so as we're talking about this, the solution that Simon Sinek lays out here is not to blame anybody else. Remember, leaders eat last. It is to assign the responsibility for change to ourselves. He says in this section, we need to look at ourselves for the answers. And there was an interesting story here too. So many interesting stories in this book. It is fascinating to read. I'm going to mess up the pronunciation of this because I've not heard of it before. Puerperal fever. Am I saying that right?
I don't know. I don't know how to say it.
Okay. Well, this was killing 70 to 80% of women giving birth in some hospitals. And some doctor, Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes, he proposed in this paper that it was the doctors themselves who were the cause of this because they didn't understand some things about sanitation, sterilization, and the spread of diseases with germs. And so they were basically bringing things in from their previous jobs in the morning into the delivery room. And that's why the mothers were getting sick and dying. And when he proposed this, it was met with fierce resistance because everyone was saying, oh, the doctors would never do anything like that. They're gentlemen. And his point was basically they didn't even know that they were doing it, but they were still doing it. And I think that is the challenge for everybody who reads this book. And it is uncomfortable to say all of the problems that I see in society right now, maybe I did not intentionally cause any of this stuff. And maybe I am not solely responsible for any one of these scenarios that I see. But how have I contributed in at least a minor way to this problem? And what can I do myself to help remedy it?
I really want to know if those doctors were milking cows before they went in. Like something like that has to have been happening. I just cannot help but think that something like that was going on. It's like, okay, where are they bringing this stuff from? What are they bringing in? I don't know. But it leads to a lot of deaths, that's for sure. But yes, I'm with you.
All right, the last section here then is part 8, Becoming a Leader. I don't have a ton to say about this one. Famous last words. But I do like how he starts this off, chapter 25, which is step 12. And that is in reference to the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program, which he says step 12 is the most important one. This is what makes this work, is that step 12 is to commit to help another alcoholic beat the disease. I think if there was one takeaway from this whole book for me, it is this idea piggybacked off of the, well, maybe it's your fault, So maybe it is my fault. And if I'm going to accept responsibility for that, what am I going to do about that? How do I start to tip the scales in the other direction? It is not to try to convince a ton of people this is what needs to be done. It is to find one person and affect change in their life. And when you do that, that has to be done face to face. Going back to like the whole, how does COVID affect this? And hearing Simon talk to that would be fascinating because he specifically says in this chapter, connections required to beat addiction cannot be virtual. You have to connect person to person. You can't do it on a Zoom call. You can't do it on the phone. And where does that leave us, right? Because I think we're in the US anyways, we're kind of in the place where things are opening back up because the cases are going way down. But I've just seen in my own church, there are people who have gotten comfortable with the way that things have been for the last year and a half. they are fine just doing the virtual thing. That's good enough for them. And I think Simon is telling us, like, he would say, we're in this dangerous spot right now. You got to reach out to those people because everyone needs those connections. How many books have we read about like digital minimalism and things like that talk about how those relationships are vital? Okay. And people who even once had those relationships now, because they were forced to go into their own cave, they've gotten comfortable there. And unless someone goes and like tries to bring them out, maybe they never do that. I think that's the big thing for me is like, who can I help out of the cave? And it's not just in the context of the church, but empathy is being shown. I forget exactly where he said it, but there was a quote that talks about how leadership and empathy, that is being shown to every person at every moment. It's not just like a once in a while when you really need it sort of a thing. If you're really going to be an effective leader, you got to have this mindset and you got to have it all the time.
When we started live streaming here at the church, we had, I'm trying to remember, it was like 300 households, I think, that were tuning into our live stream on a weekly basis. We've since opened up. The state of Minnesota has allowed us to open up basically as we were before. We're still a little tightened down as a church. We haven't completely opened up the way we were, but we have yet to see a number of folks yet from when we started live streaming over a year ago. Some of those families I've met with outside of Sunday morning, and they tell me like, oh yeah, it's really cool. Like we can stay in our jammies, we make breakfast, we sit on the couch and we watch church, and then we can go about our day. I'm like, okay. Do you have a small group? Do you connect outside of that? It's like, well, we see people once in a while. Like, okay, well, I mean, you're still seeing folks. I mean, it's probably not as extreme as what you're talking about, Mike, but I often wonder, like, okay, am I doing a disservice by enabling this live stream to help people stay home when they really don't have a need for it? Like in one case, I know everybody's vaccinated, they have no concerns, and yet they want to stay home. Like, okay, well, that's fine. It's your choice. That type of person is the one that tends to frustrate me. Now, coming from the church stance, I also know that the live stream helps us to find new believers at the same time. It's a way for new people to try out a church without actually having to do the nervous, somewhat frightening thing of entering a church for the first time. I totally understand that, and it's a way to get a feel for what is this church like without having to actually go. We have a lot of people that are new attenders at our church because of that. You're getting me on a soapbox. But that whole concept of not getting together with people and staying in isolation by choice, I feel like you're hurting yourself significantly with that, whether you realize it or not. So like you're saying, step 12, it's up to us. Once we learn how leadership works and once we learn how all of this is to be applied, it's kind of our job to like, okay, you come with me. This is how this needs to work.
Yeah.
We need to be the leaders in helping other people be leaders as well. So I think that's kind of what he's getting to here. It's the part that I kind of resonated with out of this last part.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not because we're trying to get people to comply with a set of rules. It is because this is the best thing for them. You're not forcing them to do it. You can't yank somebody out. You can't just show up and be like, you're coming with me, get in the car. Right? But you have to show that you care about them, and you have to show that you have their best interest in mind. And that gets back to the whole concept of leadership. I did find that quote, by the way. It was in the last chapter. It says, empathy is something we owe everyone all the time if we want to call ourselves a leader. And leadership is for everyone, not just those at the top. I think that's where this is practically speaking applied for people like you and me, is like we see those people who we know they're struggling. We want to help them, not because we want to pat ourselves on the back, because it's the right thing to do. They don't realize, and this is Simon's argument throughout this whole book, if you just stay virtual, going back to like the step 12 thing, if you never make that connection, the only chemicals you're activating are the endorphins and the dopamine, which we know are not going to lead you where you need to be. Really, if you want to thrive, if you don't want to be that snowmobile in the desert, you need the other ones, the social chemicals, which can only come when you have a direct interaction, when you're meeting face to face, when that empathy is really being able to be shown. I can't really show you empathy over a video call like this. I can to a certain degree, and that's the thing that makes this tricky, is like all of this stuff is on a spectrum. But I feel like with where we're at now and so much of this stuff being virtual, the tendency is, well, virtual is good enough. And really what Simon, I think, would say is, no, there's a whole lot more good to be had. You got to push past that. And it's the job of the leader to do that. Getting back to the idea of like the baby boomers and the period of excessive abundance that he describes that we find ourselves in. How do you do that if you find yourself in that situation? Because I'm in a pretty privileged situation. I recognize that. And he says in chapter 26 here, the place to do that is to think bigger, right? You have to have a big enough vision that your vision outsizes your abundant resources. So when I think about that, that's challenging to me. That's my one action item from the whole book, and it's totally a Mike action item. Just think bigger.
Yeah.
Because the tendency can be to make sure that I'm good, that my wife is good, that my kids are good. But having read through this, I realize that there are a lot of places, not just in my church, but really, how do I display that empathy to everybody that I come in contact with? And how do I, and I don't have an answer to this, but how do I expand my vision big enough so that I'm not just concerned about my own small little circle, but I'm looking at like, how can I expand that? Benjamin Franklin was said to have this quote, "What good shall I do this day?" That he would ask himself when he got up in the morning. That's kind of what I want to rewire my default to. It's like, who am I going to help when I get up in the morning? How do I make sure that this is not just about me and what I am going to do, but how can I actually help somebody else as I go about my day to day? Again, I don't have an answer, but I am inspired. I am inspired by Simon Sinek after reading this book.
Yep. What good shall I do this day? Who is it that has the coffee mug that says that? Is that Mike Vardy?
It might be Vardy.
Either him or Brett McKay. Brett McKay would totally do that, Art of Manliness. So those two I could definitely see with that coffee mug. I should get one of those. That's a solid quote.
It is.
I'm writing that one down.
That's all I got. Anything else about this book?
No, it's a pretty solid one. That much I know. It's challenging, encouraging, and yet difficult, I think, sometimes to figure out what to do with it. So,
yep.
That said, your book, what were your action items from this one, Mike?
Well, I mentioned my one action item is to think bigger. I don't think there's a whole lot of specific stuff you can glean from this book. I will say that before you go, and maybe you have 12 different action items. I don't know. But this is a lot of very big picture vision casting. This is what it means to be a leader. One thing I found interesting with this was that people get motivated by the vision, but a lot of the change happens by the small actions. You can't motivate people to change, though, by saying, oh, just do this one small thing. So the leader has to understand both the big picture and the next step. And so you walk away from this feeling like you're being called to go up to a new level. And I don't even know exactly what that looks like, which is why my one action item from this whole book is simply to think bigger. I don't even know exactly what that's going to look like. But I do know that I am inspired to grow and become a better leader and change as a result of reading this, even more so physically reading it than when I went through it with the audiobook. I feel like, the stories were great. I'm getting in style and rating now. I'll put a pin in this. Do you have any action items from this book?
Yes, I have one. So I don't have the 12, but I have one. I have a handful of teams that are underneath of me at the church, and those teams are very vital to a Sunday morning. And having read this, I wonder if I have shirked my responsibility of trying to be with them in the trenches, as it were. And I kind of want to try to work my way back into that. So much of what I've done lately is, here's your system, here's your schedule, let me know if you have any problems. And then I don't really hear from people in a lot of cases, but I also don't follow up with them in a lot of cases, unless I happen to be running sound at the same time that someone else is doing things, or I happen to be making rounds, which doesn't happen super often because there are other people that are responsible for those. I'm not real good about following up and making sure that my responsibilities are completely met as Simon Sinek would describe them. So I don't know exactly what that means, but I know that over this weekend, and I know at least one meeting on Sunday and then 2 more on Monday that I have set up as a result of this book to just kind of let me get back into the trenches and make sure that I understand what my people are doing. Yes, they're volunteers, but that means I should work a little bit harder to make their life easy. So that's kind of what I want to work towards. I have no idea how to actually summarize that into a 1-sentence thing. I'll let you do that for the show notes, or maybe I'll have to do it for next time. We'll see. But
I gotcha.
Okay.
I gotcha. Okay. Joe's action item is to lead his people.
Okay. All right. There you go. That's a simple one. So yes, that's what I need to do. I feel like I've done it partially, but not fully. And I'm a little bit ashamed to say that, but at least I'll admit it at this point.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great action item. And I had similar thoughts because I have those groups of people too that I thought about. I need to take a step up for these different groups. I just don't know exactly what I'm going to do with those yet.
Right.
So I probably have like 5 or 6 of those. And I guess those are kind of encapsulated under my think bigger one. But I like that. I like your action item, and I'm going to do something similar.
And like I said, I've got 3 meetings set up to do this. Now, meetings may not be when I say meeting, it's I'm going to be doing a training, I'm making a change, so I'm taking the opportunity to meet with people one-on-one and show them how it all works. It may only take 10, 15 minutes, 12 minutes or so, but that's kind of a gesture to a degree and an opportunity to open the door there as well. So it's kind of a sidestepped way of getting there. So when I say meeting,
sure,
it's not the traditional, we're going to sit down for an hour and do things together for an hour, whether we need the hour or not. No, that's not the case at all. Like these can sometimes be very, very short.
Gotcha. All right, style and rating, and my book. So I will go first.
Yep.
I absolutely love this book. It's great. Everyone should read it. I mentioned that I had listened to the audio book version back in the day, and I realized, having gone through it again, how much I missed the first time by listening to it. So I will renew my plea for everyone. Do not listen to books, actually read them. Because when you listen to a book, you're listening to a story, it's just going to keep going. If something really strikes you, you can't slow down and brew on something for a while. I mean, yeah, I know Audible's added the thing where you can take the clip notes and stuff like that. It's not the same thing. It's very easy to just keep going and really miss the meat of what is being said because of the audio format. I got so much more out of it this time. It was longer than I had expected. The only part of it I didn't really care for was the whole section on leading millennials. Maybe that's because I'm a millennial.
It's like, wait, you can't.
I don't know.
You can rip on the boomers, but leave us millennials alone.
Well, no, it just felt very much like a prescriptive, here's how you deal with these people, and I didn't like that. Like, even if everything he said was accurate for me specifically, which it wasn't, by the way, but even if it was 100%, I still feel like that approach just feels a little bit weird. But that was like one tiny little section, and that's just my personal preference.
Yeah.
The rest of this is absolutely phenomenal. Like I mentioned, the storytelling is really, really great. I think he might be a better storyteller in this book than any of the Ryan Holiday stuff that we have read, which is a very, very, very big compliment, because prior to that, I don't think, Ryan Holiday definitely upped the bar in terms of what we considered like a actually good storytelling. There's like a whole nother tier, which is Ryan Holiday and now Simon Sinek. I also feel like as long as this book it does something pretty amazing in that it captures your attention at the beginning and it inspires you and motivates you and kind of carries that momentum all the way through to the end of its almost 300 pages, which is no small feat. These stories that are in here, we shared a couple of them in the podcast, but there are so many of them, so many details, so many of them are just perfectly woven together. I mean, I don't know what else I can say about this book. Absolutely go read it. 5 stars. I don't even think you have to choose like who is this for, because he kind of ends it by saying that leadership is for everyone. It's not just those at the top. Even if you are completely against your own personal preference, you want nothing to do with the topic of leadership, you bristle at the thought of like the John Maxwell type stuff, and you're like, no, that's just not my thing, I would still recommend it for that person. Maybe that's the person where you get them to just go through the audio version and they're impacted that way. But it's so good. I feel like everybody who listens to Bookworm should have this one on their bookshelf. Probably a handful of books that we've read. The other ones I can think of are like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Deep Work by Cal Newport, Essentialism by Greg McKeown. And this one is in that top tier for me. I don't know. Like it's so good. And I like Simon Sinek, but it's so good that I kind of don't ever want to read another Simon Sinek book again because I feel like I'll be let down.
Because you will.
Yeah.
That's how this works, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. This is a phenomenal book.
Well, I have to say, I'm not sure I agree with you in him being better than Ryan Holiday. I feel like what I would have to do is go pull up his latest and read one of the stories from it, since I have this one on mind. Like I should go grab it and read it just to compare. I feel like but my point is they're that close in their storytelling ability. And the only one that I could think of, at least off the top of my head, that could potentially rival that would be Neil Gaiman. But that's only because Neil Gaiman takes 300 plus pages to tell a story. And these guys are doing it in 4. So keep that in mind as well. But I think you're absolutely right. Simon has really nailed something here. Obviously, this is the first time I've gone through it. You have a very solid point in, this is for everybody. Even people who aren't in leadership, and I was thinking about this before we started here on my journey in doing IT stuff that I didn't want to do and walking back and forth and such. I was thinking about how I have some family members that have previously worked in like the fast food industry, like bottom tier, like they're the cleaners. And even them, I could see how the things in this apply. Even people who are unemployed, I could see how this applies. There are so many of the recommendations, the methods, the thought processes, the concepts that he recommends and coaches you through on how to be a good leader. Those are great things to adopt, even if you have no one you're leading. If you adopt those things and you become good at them, you're going to become a leader of other people. And I would tend to think that that's something you should aspire to, whether you think you should or not. And no matter how you come at it, you're going to be leading someone at some point. Whether it's now, because you have people under you, like if you're in a spot where you've got 3 or 4 teams, I think I've got 4 teams underneath of me. It's like, if you're in a spot like me, it's very obvious. Like this is something that would be helpful. If you have no one under you though, and you're young, this is something that will eventually happen. At some point, you will have some role at some point, somewhere where someone is underneath of you, even if it's a 1-day volunteer position and you're leading people putting chairs away. Like, this stuff applies in those scenarios. Do you get my point? Like, this can carry to so many different avenues, and he tries to cover some, but the way he sets it up, you can easily see how this transcends to so many arenas, and he does an excellent job at that. So I'm with you. This is going to be a double 5-0 on this one. This is one I think you absolutely should read, no matter who you are. And I hope that people take this and learn from it, and that it's something that really impacts your life. I know that this is one that's encouraged me to step up and take the role that I've kind of been shirking, and I didn't even realize I was doing that until I read this. So that's a kudos on Simon Sinek, because that's me having to eat some humble pie there, and that'll be a fun conversation when I have to have those over the next few days. But hey, we'll get through it, right? So yes, I'll put it at 5-0. This is a solid one. Great choice, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is the definitive work on leadership. As someone who loves the John Maxwell stuff.
Sure.
And I have several John Maxwell books on my bookshelf behind me, but this is the one that I would recommend to people. And it's also interesting, getting back to like How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler, right? We balance these books with all the other ones that we've read. I think a perfect complement to this is The Second Mountain by David Brooks.
Oh, sure.
Because the whole idea about that is you try to climb that first mountain and you're making a name for yourself, creating the life you want to live. And then you get to the top of that first mountain and you're like, is this it? And then you see the second mountain, which is all about other people. And that's what leadership is all about, is about other people. So if I were to recommend a bookend to this one, that would be it.
That's a good pick for that.
All right, let's put Leaders Eat Last on the shelf. What is next, Joe?
Yeah, so the one that I've picked out for the next round is Digital Body Language by Erica Dhawan, I think is how you say that. And this will tie in a little bit with what we were talking about earlier today here, in that whenever you're not in person, it's not the same. Remember that whole rant we went on? This is going to talk about the scenario of if that's not possible, if you're not face-to-face, what does that look like, and how do you read body language when it's purely 100% digital? That's something I'm excited about. So I think it'll be a fun one. And what did you pick for after that? I don't even know this yet. You didn't put it in the outline. So what are you doing?
I didn't. Well, I'm going to keep this theme of procrastination alive, since that was one of my action items that's going to roll over. For a long time, I have wanted to discuss this book with you. I have not read it. I'm just fascinated by the title, and I'm familiar with the author. So this is a systems book, I believe.
Oh, fun.
But we are going to read Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden. Have you seen this one? I
have. I have not read it, but I've definitely seen it. And always thought it looked gimmicky to me. So this is going to be one of those, Joe's coming at this with a side eye. I'm already looking at it side-eyed.
Yeah, well, Rory Vaden wrote another book called Take the Stairs, which I really enjoyed. And he is actually the person, I've never actually met him, but he is the person who inspired me to get involved with Toastmasters, because in that book, he talked about his own journey, and he wasn't a public speaker, challenged himself, and then he ended up taking second in the world championship of public speaking. And he's written a couple books, but his primary job is with like a consulting company, I believe. So very interesting guy. And then this book came out after Take the Stairs, and it seems very much like a productivity systems book that just completely confronts one of those things, like you shouldn't procrastinate on stuff, and tries to turn it on its head. So I have no idea whether we're going to be changing our minds about procrastination and how we do it, or if we're just going to write this off completely and be like, yeah, he's off his rocker. We'll see.
All right. I am going to assume guilty until proven innocent on this one, and assume he's a crackpot until he shows me otherwise. Can I do that? Is that allowed? I'm going to do that on this one.
Sure.
All right. Well, that said, you got a Gap book this time around? I've been on the phone doing house stuff like nonstop for the last week and a half. So as much time as I've had to do this, house stuff took over. So no, hasn't happened for me. But you?
I do not have a gap book this time. I do have a couple that I have ready to go if I have the margin to tackle them, but I want to read Digital Body Language first. And so if I do get to a gap book, I will report back on it next time.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. So thanks everybody for hanging out with us today. Thank you specifically to the Bookworm Club premium members who are willing to not just give us their attention, but also contribute a few bucks every month to keep the lights on. We really appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show, you can do that at bookworm.fm/membership. When you join, you get a couple of perks. You get this wallpaper that I created. It's a 4K wallpaper with the fancy Bookworm logo. You get access to a couple of Gap episodes that Joe had created back in the day. There's a couple new sections in the club. And all of the mind map files from all of the notes that I take in these books get uploaded to that section, so you can download the PDF version, or if you want to take the MindNote file and customize it yourself, those are there too. So if you want to support the show, you can do that at, again, bookworm.fm/membership, $5 a month. Thanks to everyone who helps us keep the lights on and keep the show going.
Blake has a good point. I'm holding back on Gap books. Tale of Two Cities, Narnia. I suppose I could do a thing on the Narnia. That would have to be like a one-on-one live stream for an hour and a half, probably. But anyway, there's that. That all said, if you are one of these that's been reading along with us, I know that's what we intended Bookworm to be, and everybody has used it very differently than what we intended. That's how these things go. But if you are reading along with us, pick up Digital Body Language by Erica Dewan, and we will cover that one for you in a couple of weeks.